A statement was issued by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Responding to the threats of U.S. President Donald Trump, he urged citizens to support the national manufacturer and buy only Indian goods. According to Bloomberg, speaking at a rally in the northern state of Uttar Pradesh, Modi emphasized the need to protect the country's economic interests in the face of global instability. He said that the EU should not underestimate its economic uncertainty, and from now on, the only criterion for our concessions should be the origin of the goods. We buy only what is created by the labor of Indians. According to the agency's sources, the Modi government has not officially ordered Indian refineries to stop buying Russian oil, and no decision has been made to stop imports. Both public and private institutions can continue to choose suppliers at their own discretion, based on commercial feasibility. And analysts note that for years the United States has turned a blind eye to New Delhi's close historical ties with Moscow, viewing India as a key counterweight to China in Asia. But now Trump may change his approach to use economic pressure on Modi as a means of influencing the Kremlin ruler, Russian terrorist Vladimir Putin, who has so far refused to meet Washington's peace efforts. We remember that earlier, the Donald Trump administration imposed 25% tariffs on Indian exports to the United States and threatened new trade measures if New Delhi did not stop buying Russian oil. In addition, the U.S. president sharply criticized for joining the BRICS and maintaining close ties with Moscow. According to him, together they can destroy their dead economies. Trump's advisor, Stephen Miller, said that India was financing the Russian invasion of Ukraine by buying oil from Russia. More than 6 months after officially taking office as head of the White House, the patience of Donald Trump, who promised to end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours, seems to have run out, and the U.S. president gave the Kremlin dictator, remember, the term until August 8, 2025, to agree to a truce. Otherwise, he threatens to impose duties, The Times writes. I propose to analyze the arguments and opinions presented by the publication. Trump ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be deployed closer to Russia. Trump emphasized that we must come to an agreement so that people stop dying. It is noted that the head of the White House had previously issued a number of ultimatums to the Kremlin dictator, but he did not set any deadlines and Putin ignored them. Trump is now threatening to impose sanctions not only on Russia, but also on countries that continue to do business with Russia. As Trump pointed out, they seem to be pretty good at avoiding sanctions, and we all know they are cunning as characters. Trump is threatening to impose duties on those countries that buy oil, gas, and uranium from Russia, and this ultimatum is expected to force them to make a choice: either continue to sell goods to the U.S. or import oil from Russia. The U.S. Senate has prepared a bill that would impose a 500% duty on all countries, although Trump has proposed reducing the rate to 100%, and Republican Jim Risch, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, predicts that when and if sanctions are imposed, it will be a shock and awe. Putin has made many mistakes, but this may be the biggest one. According to the Energy and Clean Air Research Center, in June of this year, China and India accounted for 85% of Russia's crude oil exports. Even before the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, India was buying most of its oil from countries such as Saudi Arabia and Iraq, while Russian oil accounted for only 0.2% of its imports. However, about a year later, its share was 45%. As a result, critics accused Delhi of trying to profit from the war. And Trump said on Monday, they don't care how many people in Ukraine are being killed by the Russian war machine. Because of this, I will increase the tariff that India pays. Last week, the American leader said that the U.S. could impose a 25% duty on India. As for China, Trump has softened his stance somewhat in recent weeks after tariffs briefly rose to 145% this year. In the fall, the White House is planning to meet with the Chinese president. Such a potential meeting is under consideration. Therefore, optimism about a trade agreement between the two countries is growing. The publication points out that China now accounts for almost half of Russia's oil exports and emphasizes that the Russian economy is dependent on oil and gas. If Russia did not receive income from them, it is hard to imagine how it could finance the war at all. Without oil revenues, the aggressor country would be forced to start printing money. Inflation in Russia will soon reach 10%, and it is noteworthy that over the weekend, the Economic Alliance of Oil-Producing Countries, OPEC+, agreed to increase production. This was due to expectations of supply disruptions from Russia. And the article says that if the U.S. imposes 100% duties on Chinese goods, China may do the same, or suspend exports of rare minerals. This will threaten American defense and the technology industry. In this case, the United States could face inflation, which would hit the wallets of American voters before the midterm elections in 2026. There are also many nuances as far as the U.S. is concerned, which we have mentioned. Meanwhile, continuing with the topic of China, Ukraine has not received any reaction from Beijing to the evidence provided that Russian weapons contain Chinese parts. Vladislav Vlasyuk, the presidential commissioner for sanctions policy, said this during the telethon. The Ukrainian official emphasized that Ukraine values China as a reliable trading partner and respects Beijing's decision not to provide lethal weapons to the Russian occupiers. Vlasyuk also said that a number of consultations were held with Chinese representatives on the topic of Chinese components in Russian weapons. There is an absolutely serious perception that this is a problem. The Chinese government should not allow critical components to enter the Russian military-industrial complex. On the other hand, we have never received a response to any investigation they might have made based on our information. According to him, after Russian strikes on Kyiv, experts managed to identify parts that were produced at a Chinese factory. It is noted that the Ukrainian side provided China with evidence indicating that they were indeed made in China. However, Chinese diplomats have not provided an explanation on this matter. Following this, Ukraine decided to impose sanctions on 5 Chinese manufacturers. The European Union is pushing for sanctions against China for supporting Russia in its war against Ukraine. The EU intends to seek sanctions against China, an unnamed EU diplomat told Politico. The EU decided to take such a step after a July publication by Reuters revealed that Russia had secretly received Chinese engines and drones. As noted, the engines were shipped to Russia through shell companies under the guise of industrial refrigeration units to circumvent Western sanctions, which Russia has always done well. And this was emphasized even by the President of the United States, Donald Trump. The report raised alarm in Brussels, and 15 European Union countries asked Beijing about the shipments, but China either denied any involvement or refused to answer. As in the case of our request, no response was received. The diplomat said that the report is accurate and shows that China is strengthening its role, both quantitatively and qualitatively. And it's fair to say that without China's support, the war would look very different now. According to him, the EU knew about the supply of Chinese drones to Russia before the reports appeared, and the diplomat emphasized that after August, we will insist on imposing sanctions. We want dialogue, but we also want action. China has repeatedly had to deny that it is supplying Russia with weapons for use in Ukraine, insisting that it is not supplying weapons to either side and has an unbiased position on the war. At the same time, the United States claimed last year that Beijing had actually taken Russia's side in the war and was directly seeking assistance in Russia's military machine. In an unexpected maneuver 4 weeks before the start of the Russian-Belarusian military exercise Zapad 2025, Germany deployed 5 Eurofighter jets to Poland. This is reported by T-Online, according to European Pravda. On Monday, German fighter jets arrived at the Minsk Mazowiecki military airfield in Poland. A representative of the German Air Force said that the planes will start flying on Tuesday and are expected to stay in Poland for several days. German Eurofighters will support the Polish armed forces in monitoring NATO airspace and tracking possible Russian actions along the alliance's eastern flank. And this operation is a clear demonstration of the solidarity of NATO allies and serves to ensure reliable deterrence and protection of the shared airspace, as noted by the German Air Force. In addition, about 150 soldiers in the Bundeswehr were deployed to Poland. And, as noted, Germany decided to deploy the planes after a request from Poland. Of course, I would like to imagine that after our request the same thing could have happened, but the situation is obvious. The Polish military command called the use of German Eurofighter jets another example of the Allies' cooperation and their sincere commitment to the security of Central and Eastern Europe. And the redeployment of the aircraft took place 4 weeks before the start of major military exercises in Russia and Belarus, which are scheduled for September. Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda said that this year's Western exercises will be 2 to 3 times smaller than in 2021, before Russia's full-scale attack on Ukraine. And Belarus recently announced that it does not rule out a partial change of venue for Zapad 2025 exercise, which it promised to move inland, blaming the allegedly belligerent behavior of Poland and Lithuania. Of course, what else can Lukashenko's regime say, just like the Kremlin dictator and his regime?